The day my father died, he left behind two things: a multi-million-dollar estate and a letter only I was meant to read. When the attorney pulled out Dad's will at the reading, my brother Michael's smile stretched wide across his face. The company, the house in Martha's Vineyard, the investment portfolio, all his. He looked at me from across the mahogany table, straightened his Brooks Brothers tie, and said it loud enough for everyone to hear. "You're worth nothing, Ellie. You never were." What Michael didn't know was that our father, the shrewd businessman who built Sullivan Industries from nothing, had taught me one final lesson about value. The inheritance that truly mattered wasn't listed in that legal document. It was hidden where only someone who paid attention would find it, just like Dad had taught me. By the time I was finished, Michael would understand exactly what I had inherited, and it would change our family forever. Growing up in the Sullivan family meant understanding your place in the hierarchy. My father, Robert Sullivan, built his real estate development company from scratch after returning from Vietnam with nothing but determination and a knack for seeing potential where others saw decay. In our Connecticut suburb, the Sullivan name opened doors, but it also came with expectations. My brother Michael was groomed for success from day one. 3 years older than me, he had our father's commanding presence and our mother's charm. Captain of the lacrosse team, valedictorian, Harvard Business School, Michael's path was meticulously plotted and executed. My father beamed at every achievement, every handshake with a future connection, every news clipping that mentioned the promising young Sullivan. I was different, quieter, more interested in the stories behind the properties than their market values. Where Michael saw dollar signs, I saw history. Where he networked, I observed. My mother, before cancer took her when I was 14, used to say I had an old soul. "Ellie sees beneath the surface," she'd tell Dad. He'd nod, distracted, already thinking about his next acquisition. The divide between Michael and me grew deeper after Mom died. I was struggling through sophomore year of high school when Michael was already making waves as Dad's apprentice during college breaks. I remember the Thanksgiving when I was 16. Dad had invited potential investors to our home, the Sullivan annual tradition of mixing family and business. I'd spent hours researching the history of a Brooklyn neighborhood where Dad was considering a development project. "Dad," I said when there was a brief lull in conversation, "I found out that building you're looking at was one of the first integrated apartment complexes in the area. There's a whole community history." Michael cut me off with a laugh. "History doesn't pay the bills, sis. Those old buildings are teardowns, not museums." Dad nodded. "Michael's right. We're not in the preservation business." The investors chuckled, and Dad launched into projected returns. I became invisible again. But there were moments, quiet moments, when Dad and I connected differently. He had a private library in his study filled with first editions and historical maps. When I was 12, I found him there late one night, examining an old leather-bound book. "This," he said, showing me a first edition Thoreau, "is worth more than any property I own." Over the years, as Michael climbed the corporate ladder at Sullivan Industries, I carved my own path. Art history degree, then a master's in architectural preservation. Dad never said he was proud, but he started sending me articles about historical buildings, asking my opinion on restoration projects, small acknowledgments that felt monumental. The real turning point came 5 years ago. Dad suffered a mild heart attack. Just a warning, his doctor called it. During his recovery, I visited daily, bringing books from his collection to read aloud. Michael sent flowers from business trips. One afternoon, Dad asked me to retrieve a specific book from his study, a rare edition of architectural drawings. Behind it was a small leather notebook I'd never seen before. "That's my life's real work," Dad said quietly when he saw me holding it. "Not the buildings, not the money. This." It was a catalog, meticulously documented, of every historically significant book, map, and document he'd collected over 40 years. Some he'd purchased through auction houses, others through private collectors, a few through channels that seemed deliberately vague in his notes. "Your brother thinks success is measured by the square footage you control," Dad said, "but there are other kinds of value in this world." That was the beginning of what we came to call the grand gesture. For the next 5 years, Dad taught me everything about his secret collection, items so rare that museums had tried to acquire them, documents so valuable they were kept in specialized storage units across 3 states, all while Michael believed Dad was grooming him alone for the Sullivan legacy. The call came on a Tuesday. Dad, at 76, had suffered a massive stroke in his office. By the time I reached Massachusetts General Hospital, Michael was already there, pacing the hallway in his tailored suit, barking into his phone about postponing meetings. "They're saying it doesn't look good," he said, barely looking up when I arrived. "The board needs to be reassured about succession." Dad lingered for 3 days. I stayed, sleeping in the uncomfortable hospital chair. Michael came and went, always with an excuse about keeping the company running. On the final night, when the monitors showed Dad's heartbeat growing weaker, I was alone with him. I held his hand and promised him I would protect what mattered most. Michael arrived 20 minutes after Dad passed, straightening his tie as he entered the room. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of funeral arrangements and condolence calls. The memorial service at Trinity Church in Boston was packed with business associates, politicians, and Boston's elite. Michael delivered a eulogy that highlighted Dad's business acumen and philanthropy. I spoke briefly about his love of history and books. Few seemed to notice the difference in our portraits of the man. The reading of the will was scheduled for exactly 15 days after Dad's death at the offices of Harrington and Myers, Dad's longtime attorneys. Michael arrived with his wife Vanessa and their 2 perfectly groomed children. I came alone, wearing the vintage Hermes scarf Dad had given me on my 30th birthday, the only one of his gifts that hadn't been selected by his assistant. Martin Harrington, Dad's attorney for 30 years, began formally. The initial provisions were standard: charitable donations, provisions for longtime staff. Then came the central bequests. "To my son, Michael Robert Sullivan, I leave Sullivan Industries, including all business holdings, commercial properties, and associated assets. Additionally, I bequeath to him the family home in Wellesley and the vacation property in Martha's Vineyard." Michael's smile grew with each item. His wife squeezed his arm, whispering something in his ear that made him nod confidently. "To my daughter, Eleanor Jean Sullivan," Martin continued, "I leave my personal effects, including my collection of books and papers, and a trust fund providing an annual stipend of $50,000 for her lifetime." The room fell silent. Everyone knew Dad's personal effects, while perhaps sentimentally valuable, were worth a fraction of the business empire. The stipend, while generous to some, was pocket change compared to what Michael had just received. Michael couldn't contain himself. "That seems appropriate," he said, not bothering to lower his voice, "considering the contributions to the family business." Martin cleared his throat, uncomfortable but professional. "There is one additional provision," he said, "a letter to be delivered privately to Miss Sullivan." Michael frowned. "What letter? What's in it?" That information is private between your father and your sister, Martin replied firmly. After the formal proceedings concluded, Martin handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Dad's distinctive handwriting. Michael intercepted me as I was leaving. "I hope you're not disappointed," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. His wife and children waited by their Range Rover, watching us. Dad was always practical. The business needs leadership, not someone who gets emotional about old buildings. I tucked the envelope into my purse. "I'm fine, Michael." "Good," he said, then lowered his voice. "Because, let's be honest, Ellie, in terms of the Sullivan legacy, you're worth nothing. You never were. Just Dad's sentimental project." Something in me snapped. 20 years of dismissal crystallized in that moment. "You know nothing about Dad's legacy," I said quietly. He laughed. "I am Dad's legacy. The company, the Sullivan name, it all continues through me. What do you have? Some dusty books and a pity stipend?" As he turned to leave, he added, "I'm hosting a reception at the house next weekend for the board and key investors. Feel free to come. Might help you network for a real job. God knows you'll need one now." That night, alone in my apartment, I finally opened Dad's letter. Inside was a single key and a handwritten note. "Ellie, what Michael values can be taken away as easily as it was given. What you and I value endures. The collection is yours now. All of it. The key opens box 337 at First Boston Security. Inside are the coordinates to everything else. Trust only Jenkins with the specifics. Remember our conversations about the Jefferson letters? It's time. This is your inheritance, not just the items, but the knowledge of what to do with them. I trust you to make the right choices. You always have. Love, Dad." I recognized the reference immediately. Jefferson's letters to Madison, documents historians had speculated about for centuries. Dad had hinted he might have access to them, but I'd always assumed it was theoretical. The next morning, I visited First Boston Security. Box 337 contained a weathered leather journal with locations, access codes, and contacts for Dad's true collection, historical treasures stored in secure locations across the country. According to his meticulous notes, the collection was worth well over $200 million to the right institutions, and no one, not even his attorneys, knew the full extent of it. As I read through the journal, my phone buzzed with a text from Michael. "Clearing out Dad's study this weekend. Anything in particular you want before the estate sale? The books, obviously, but they'll need to be appraised first." The board reception was 3 days away. Michael had no idea what he was about to lose, or what I had truly inherited. Saturday evening arrived with unseasonable warmth for New England in April. I pulled my car into the circular driveway of my childhood home, now legally Michael's. The Sullivan estate was illuminated like a showcase, with catering vans parked discreetly around back and luxury vehicles lining the drive. I'd spent the previous 3 days with Jenkins, Dad's longtime rare book dealer, and apparently much more. Together, we'd verified the locations of key pieces in the collection and made certain arrangements that Dad had outlined in his journal. I chose my outfit carefully. A black Chanel dress Mom had left me, pearl earrings, and red-soled Louboutins that clicked authoritatively across the marble foyer as I entered. I wasn't the same invisible Ellie anymore. Michael was holding court in the great room, surrounded by board members and investors. His wife, Vanessa, spotted me first, her smile faltering slightly before she composed herself. Ellie, we weren't sure you'd come, she said, air-kissing my cheek. Such a difficult time for everyone. Michael turned, bourbon in hand. Well, look who decided to join us, the historian. He gestured around expansively. Taking one last look before we modernize, I'm thinking of turning Dad's study into a home gym. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, but others chuckled. I wouldn't make renovation plans just yet, I said evenly. Michael rolled his eyes for his audience. Dad's books are yours, Ellie. We've already called Christie's to appraise them. Probably fetch enough to supplement your stipend for a few years. It's not about the books in the study, I replied. It's about the collection. The board chairman, Walter Pearson, looked between us. Collection? Robert had quite an interest in historical documents, as I recall. Michael waved dismissively. Just a hobby, nothing significant. I smiled. Actually, I've just come from the Morgan Library. Their curator was quite interested in discussing the previously unknown Hamilton Burr correspondence that my father acquired in 2008. The room quieted. Michael's face tightened. What are you talking about? Dad's real passion project, his legacy. I opened my clutch and removed a formal letter on Morgan Library letterhead. They're prepared to offer $12.4 million just for that single set of documents. The Jefferson letters we're taking to the National Archives next week. The board members began murmuring. Michael snatched the letter, scanning it with increasingly frantic eyes. This is ridiculous, he sputtered. If these existed, they'd be part of the estate. They were his personal property, left specifically to me, I replied, along with approximately 200 other historical documents and artifacts that Dad collected over 40 years. Walter Pearson stepped forward. Eleanor, are you saying Robert had a private collection of historical significance that wasn't disclosed in the company assets? Exactly. Dad kept it separate. He believed some things shouldn't be commodified. I looked directly at Michael. The complete collection has been independently valued at approximately $230 million. The glass slipped from Michael's hand, shattering on the hardwood floor. No one moved to clean it up. That's not possible, he whispered. Dad would have told me. He did tell someone, I replied, just not you. Vanessa pushed forward. Even if this is true, Michael is the executor of the estate. Any undisclosed assets. Actually, I interrupted, Martin Harrington has the formal documentation transferring ownership of each item to me, dated and notarized over the past 5 years. It's all completely legal. I turned to address the room. My father built Sullivan Industries from nothing. He was proud of it. But he also understood that buildings rise and fall. Companies merge and dissolve. What endures is our cultural heritage, the documents and artifacts that tell our story as a nation. I walked to the fireplace, where a portrait of Dad overlooked the room. He entrusted me with preserving that heritage. The collection isn't being sold off. It's being donated to the appropriate institutions with Sullivan Foundation oversight. Dad's name will be on museum wings and research centers across the country. Michael lunged forward, grabbing my arm. You can't do this! That collection, if it even exists, is worth a fortune. It's not about the money, Michael. It never was. I pulled free of his grasp. Dad knew you'd never understand that. This is about punishing me, isn't it? Michael's voice rose. Because Dad gave me the company? No, it's about honoring what Dad truly valued. I looked around at the assembled board members and investors. You all knew Robert Sullivan as a businessman, but his true passion, his true legacy, was preserving history. I reached into my clutch again and removed a second document, which is why I've decided to donate my shares of Sullivan Industries to the Sullivan Historical Preservation Foundation, effective immediately. Walter Pearson stepped forward, taking the document. What shares? You don't have voting shares in the company. Actually, I do, 5%, purchased by Dad through a shell corporation 5 years ago. The foundation will now hold those shares in perpetuity, with a mandate to ensure that all Sullivan developments respect historical significance. I looked around the room, nodding to 3 board members who subtly nodded back, allies Dad had cultivated who shared his secret passion for preservation. You've been outmaneuvered, Michael, by Dad and by me. I turned and walked toward the door, stopping only when I reached the foyer. Looking back at the stunned faces, I delivered my final blow. The Sullivan legacy isn't about square footage or profit margins. It's about what we choose to protect for future generations. I smiled at my brother's thunderstruck expression. Maybe I was worth something, after all. The aftermath was nuclear. As I walked out of the house that night, my phone exploded with texts and calls. Board members, family friends, even distant relatives who suddenly remembered my existence. I silenced it all and drove to my apartment in Cambridge, hands shaking on the steering wheel. I wasn't naive. I knew there would be consequences. Michael wouldn't surrender without a fight, and I'd just publicly challenged not only his authority, but his understanding of our father. The first legal notice arrived 3 days later, Michael contesting the ownership transfer of the collection. His attorneys claimed Dad couldn't have been of sound mind when making these arrangements. The irony wasn't lost on me. If Dad wasn't of sound mind for my inheritance, what did that say about Michael's? Jenkins proved invaluable during this time. As Dad's trusted dealer and confidant for over 30 years, he had documentation for every acquisition, every transfer. He also introduced me to Abigail Winters, the attorney Dad had retained specifically for collection matters. Your father anticipated this reaction, she told me during our first meeting. He left a video deposition explaining his decisions. We'll only use it if absolutely necessary. Meanwhile, I proceeded with Dad's plans. The Hamilton Burr correspondence was formally presented to the Morgan Library, creating a scholarly sensation. The Jefferson letters were authenticated by 3 independent experts before being donated to the National Archives. Each unveiling included the full story of Robert Sullivan's decades-long mission to preserve American historical documents. The press couldn't get enough. The secret Sullivan legacy ran as a feature in The New Yorker. The Wall Street Journal published a front-page article titled, "Beyond Bricks and Mortar, the True Empire of Robert Sullivan." I gave exactly 1 interview to the American Historical Review, focusing solely on the historical significance of the collection. 6 weeks after the confrontation, Walter Pearson requested a private meeting. We met at a quiet restaurant in Back Bay, away from corporate eyes. "Your brother is self-destructing," he said bluntly after we ordered. "He's alienated 3 major clients with his obsession over your inheritance. The board is concerned." I sipped my water. "That sounds like a Sullivan Industries problem." Walter studied me. "You're more like your father than anyone realized. He could play the long game too." "I'm not playing games, Walter." "Perhaps not, but you've changed the rules." He leaned forward. "The Foundation's oversight of historical properties, it's causing delays in 2 major developments. Millions in potential revenue are at stake." "The Foundation is fulfilling its mission. History can't be rushed. Walter nodded slowly. Which is why I'm here with a proposal. Michael is willing to establish a formal historical impact division within Sullivan Industries, with you as its director. Full autonomy, board seat, appropriate compensation. I laughed despite myself. He's trying to bring me under control. He's trying to salvage what's left of his relationship with you and with his investors. The uncertainty is killing confidence in the company. I considered my response carefully. I'm not interested in working for Michael, but I am interested in protecting Dad's legacy, both legacies. Tell the board I'll consider dissolving the foundation's oversight role under certain conditions. Those conditions became the framework for a settlement that transformed Sullivan Industries. The company established the Robert Sullivan Center for Historical Preservation with an annual budget of $10 million. All development projects would undergo historical impact assessment. And most importantly, Sullivan Industries would partner with educational institutions to provide access to historical documents for researchers and students. Michael and I negotiated through intermediaries for weeks, never directly speaking. The final agreement required his signature and mine in person at Martin Harrington's office. When I arrived, Michael was already there, looking thinner than I remembered, dark circles under his eyes. "You got what you wanted," he said as I sat across from him. "Happy now?" "This isn't about winning, Michael." "Then what was it about? Humiliating me? Proving Dad loved you more?" I shook my head. It was about honoring who Dad really was, not just the businessman, but the preservationist, the man who valued history as much as progress. Michael's jaw tightened. He should have told me. "Would you have listened? You spent years mocking his hobby." For a moment, I saw something like regret flicker across his face. "You've seen the video deposition?" I nodded. He explains everything. Why he kept the collection secret, why he chose me as its guardian. "And what does he say about me?" Michael's voice had lost its edge, revealing vulnerability I hadn't heard since we were children. "That you were exactly what he raised you to be, the perfect Sullivan businessman." I paused. "But he worried you never understood that some things have value beyond their price." Michael stared at the settlement papers between us. "I found something in his desk after you left that night. A photo of us, you, me, Dad, at that historical village in Williamsburg. You were maybe 10, I was 13. Do you remember?" The memories surfaced unexpectedly. A family vacation before Mom got sick. Dad explaining Revolutionary War history to us on the cobblestone streets. "You were so excited about the printing press demonstration," Michael continued. "Dad bought you a reproduction of the Declaration of Independence. I thought it was boring. You wanted to go to the water park instead," I recalled. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. He wrote something on the back of the photo. "My 2 legacies." I always thought he meant the company would be mine and, I don't know, something smaller for you. "But we were both his legacy," I said quietly, "just different parts of who he was." After we signed the settlement, Martin handed me an envelope. "Your father asked that this be delivered once matters were resolved." Inside was a key to a safe deposit box and another note in Dad's handwriting. "Ellie, now that the storm has passed, there's one final piece of the collection that belongs to both of my children. The first edition of Common Sense by Thomas Paine that my father showed me when I was a boy. It inspired everything that came after. Sometimes, like nations, need to break apart before they can form a more perfect union. Share this with your brother when you're both ready. Some inheritances can only be appreciated after we understand their true value. All my love, Dad. 6 months later, the Robert Sullivan Center for Historical Preservation opened its doors. Michael attended the ceremony, standing awkwardly at the back until I acknowledged him from the podium. History isn't just about preserving the past, I said in my remarks. It's about learning from it, about recognizing that what divides us is often less important than what we share. After the applause, Michael approached me. "That was a good speech." "Thanks." He hesitated, then said, "I've been reading some of Dad's books, trying to understand what he saw in them. And I'm starting to get it. Not all of it, but some." He handed me a small package. "I found this in an auction catalog. Jenkins helped me authenticate it." Inside was a first edition poetry collection that had been on Dad's acquisition wish list for years. "I thought the center should have it," Michael said, "in Dad's memory." It wasn't forgiveness, not yet, but it was a beginning, a recognition of shared inheritance that went beyond assets and estates. That night, I added Dad's final note to the journal of the collection, completing the record he'd entrusted to me. Some things in life can't be measured in dollars or square footage. Some inheritances are invisible until we're ready to see them. I was Robert Sullivan's daughter, and finally, I understood exactly what that meant. Looking back now, 2 years after that will reading, I realize that inheritances come in many forms. My father left me more than just historical artifacts. He left me his perspective, his patience, and his understanding that true value often lies beneath the surface. Michael and I still aren't close, but we found a way to honor different aspects of our father's legacy. The Sullivan Center has become nationally recognized, and Sullivan Industries now incorporates historical preservation into every project, something that, surprisingly, has become a market advantage. I've learned that family dynamics are as complex and layered as history itself. Sometimes the most precious inheritances are the lessons we never knew we were being taught, about worth, about value, about standing your ground. If you've ever been underestimated or overlooked, remember that your worth isn't determined by others' perceptions. It's revealed through your actions and choices, just as my father revealed his true priorities through his. If you found meaning in my story, please subscribe to hear more journeys of unexpected triumph. And share your own experiences in the comments below. I'd love to know how you discovered your true inheritance.